So for a brief moment I was happy to have had the privilege of going through those long months of torment because the experience provided an opportunity for me to test the soundness of the principles of achievement, which I had so laboriously wrested from my research. When this thought came to me, I stopped still, drew my feet closely together, saluted, I did not know what or whom, and stood rigidly at attention for several minutes. It seemed at first like a foolish thing to do, but when I was standing there another thought came through in the form of an other that was as brief and snappy as any ever given by a military commander to a subordinate. The order said, "Tomorrow get into your automobile and drive to Philadelphia, where you will receive aid in publishing your philosophy of achievement." There was no further explanation and no modification of the order. As soon as I received it, I walked back to the house, went to bed, and slept with peace in mind such as I had not known for over a year. When I awoke the following morning, I got out of bed and immediately began to pack my clothes and make ready for the trip to Philadelphia. My reason told me that I was embarking upon a fool's mission. Who did I know in Philadelphia to whom I might apply for financial aid in publishing 8 volumes of books that cost of $20,000, I asked myself. Instantly the answer to that question flashed into my mind as plainly as it had been uttered in audible words. You are following orders now instead of asking questions. Your other self will be in charge during this trip. There was another condition which seemed to make my preparation to go to Philadelphia absurd. I had no money. This thought had barely occurred to me when my other self exploded by giving another sharp order saying, "Ask your brother-in-law for $50 and he will lend it to you." The order seemed definite and final. Without further hesitation I followed instructions. When I asked my brother-in-law for the money, he said, "Why, certainly you can have $50, but if you are going to be gone very long, you had better take $100. I thanked him and said I thought $50 would be enough. I knew it was enough, but that was the amount my other self had commanded to me. That was the amount my other self had commanded me to ask for, and that is the amount I secured. I was greatly relieved when I found that my brother-in-law was not going to ask me why I was going to Philadelphia. If he had known all that had taken place in my mind during that previous night, he perhaps would have thought I should go to a psychiatric hospital for treatment instead of going to Philadelphia on a wild goose chase. My other self takes command. I left my head telling me I was a fool in my other self, commanding me to ignore the challenge and carry out my instructions. I drove all night, arriving in Philadelphia the next morning. My first thought was to look up modestly priced boarding house where I could rent a room for about $1 a day. Here again my other self took charge and gave the command to register at the most exclusive hotel in the city. With a little more than $40 of my remaining capital in my pocket, it seemed like financial suicide when I marched up the desk and asked for a room. Or rather, should I say, I started to ask for a room when my newly discovered other self gave me the order to ask for a suite of rooms, the cost of which will about consume my remaining capital in 2 days. I obeyed. The bellboy picked up my bags, handed me a claim check for my automobile, and bowed me toward the elevator as if I were Prince of Wales. As if I were the Prince of Wales. It was the first time in more than a year that any human being had shown me such deference. My own relative, with whom I have been living, far from having shown me deference, had, so I imagined, felt I was a burden on their hands, and I am sure that I was, because no man in the frame of mind I had been for the past year could be anything other than a burden to all with whom he came into contact. It was becoming apparent that my other self was determined to win me away from the inferiority complex which I had developed. I chose the best boy $1. I started to estimate what my hotel bill will be by the end of the week, when my other self commanded me to get my mind entirely off all thoughts of limitation, and to conduct myself for the time being just as I would if I had all the money I wanted in my pockets. The experience I was passing through was both new and strange to me. I had never posed as being anything other than what I believed myself to be. For nearly half an hour this other self gave orders which I followed to the letter during the subsequent period of my stay in Philadelphia. The instructions were given through the medium of thoughts which presented themselves in my mind with such force that they were already distinguishable from my ordinary self-created thoughts. I received strange orders from a strange source. My instructions began in this fashion: you are now completely in charge of your other self. You are entitled to know that two entities occupy your body, as in fact two familiar entities occupy the body of each living person on earth. One of these entities is motivated by and responds to the impulse of fear. The other is motivated by and responds to the impulse of faith. For more than a year you have been driven like a slave by the fear entity. Night before last, the faith entity gained control over your physical body, and you are now motivated by that entity. For the sake of convenience, you might call this faith entity your other self. It knows no limitations, no fears, and recognizes no such word as impossible. You were directed to select this environment of luxury in a good hotel as a means of discouraging the return to power of the fear entity. The fear-motivated old self is not dead. It has merely been dethroned, and it will follow you around wherever you go, waiting a favorable opportunity to step in and take charge of you again. It can gain control of you only through your thoughts. Remember this, and keep the doors of your mind tightly closed against all thoughts which seek to you in any matter whatsoever, and you will be safe. Do not permit yourself to worry about the money you will need for your immediate expenses. That will come to you by the time you must have it. Now let us get down to business. First of all, you should know that the faith entity now in charge of your body performs no miracles, nor does it work in opposition to any nature's laws. As long as it is in charge of your body, it will guide you when you call on it, through impulses of thought which it will place in your mind, in carrying out your plans through the most logical and convenient natural media available. Above everything else, get this fact clearly fixed in your mind, that your other self will not do the work for you. It will only guide you intelligently in achieving for yourself the objects of your desires. This other self will aid you in translating your plans into reality. Moreover, you should know that it begins always with a major or most pronounced desire. At this time, your major desire, the one which brought you here, is to publish and distribute the results of your research into the causes of success and failure. You estimate that you will need approximately $25,000. Among your acquaintances, there's a man who will supply you with this needed capital. Begin at once to call into your mind the names of all persons of your acquaintances whom you have reason to believe might be induced to furnish the financial aid you require. When the name of the logical person comes into your mind, you will recognize it immediately. Communicate with that person and the aid you seek will be given. In your approach, however, represent your request in terminology such as you will use in the usual course of business transactions. Make no reference whatsoever to this introduction you have had to your other self. If you violate these instructions, you will meet with temporary defeat. Your other self will remain in charge and continue to direct you as long as you rely upon it. Keep doubt and fear and worry and all thoughts of limitation entirely out of your mind. That will be all for the present. You will now begin to move of your free will precisely as you did before you discovered the other self. Physically, you are the same as you have always been. Therefore, no one will recognize that any change has taken place in you. I looked around the room, blinking my eyes, and to make sure that I was not dreaming, I got up and walked over to a mirror and looked at myself closely. The expression of myself had changed from one of doubt to one of courage and faith. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that my physical body was in charge of an influence far different from the one which had been dethroned 2 nights before, as I walked around that schoolhouse in West Virginia.